What's up everybody? Welcome back to another video. 0 Mile ADV, a true beginner's guide to adventure motorcycling from a true beginner. I've been riding a decent amount and I have a BDR in my belt, so maybe I'm moving into like beginner intermediate, like slightly out of beginner. But this is a video I've wanted to make for a long time, ever since I started looking at adventure bikes. The vaunted BMW R1250 GS. Yeah, this bike is amazing. We're going to talk about three things. One, road riding ability. Two, off-road riding, mostly from a beginner's perspective. If you're a good rider and you want to review and you've never ridden one, you shouldn't watch my channels because this is going to be from a beginner's perspective and looking back at buying my first motorcycle and that journey. How now, having ridden this and spent some time on it, how it would impact my decision if I was going to buy a motorcycle. And number three, who I think this bike is for if you're looking to get into adventure motorcycling and the type of riding that you want to grow into or the things that you want to do. What kind of rider does this suit? So with that, let's get into it. All right, and with that, if you haven't, please subscribe. It helps the channel. You can also go to zeromileadv.com, download our free BDR packing list. We are trying to build some amazing motorcycling, dirt, and ADV-based apparel. So if you're watching this at a later date, support us, buy some of our gear. It helps the channel out, and we want your feedback. So more importantly, we want to know what your thoughts are. How can we improve it? How can we make it better? How can we provide you with a better product? If you're watching this when this first comes out, we're getting closer. We're only a couple months away before our first product launch, so we're getting closer, so get ready for that. So with that, let's get into item number one, road riding. The short of it is this thing rides absolutely amazing on the road. Yeah, I mean, you can't really beat this bike road riding. The power delivery is amazing, the 19-inch front wheel, the tail lever suspension, when you hammer on the brakes, it doesn't brake dive. So if you're new to motorcycles, like I was, the first time you hop on a bike and you've got especially an adventure bike and you hammer on that front brake, you should never hammer on, like Moto Jitsu says, you got to squeeze the front brake. But if you squeeze that front brake, you don't just grip it, you're going to get brake dive where the front of the bike dives down as you're braking. This, I feel like you could hammer the brake and it won't dive. The bike just stays flat. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because maybe you lose how hard you're pulling. You lose that feeling if you're squeezing versus if you're hammering. I'm not sure, because if you're hammering, the bike dives fast. But if you squeeze, you can feel the bike lean forward, but it's not as hard. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. I'll leave that to the motorcycle instructors, but you don't feel it, which is really, really nice. And as somebody who's ridden a lot of bikes, it's just nice not to feel that front bike dive. The power delivery is amazing. I mean, plenty of power on tap here for if you want to get around a car. With the motor and the weights that way down low, this thing rips in the corners. It's super fun. Again, back to like Moto Jitsu, he rides a BMW 1250 GS and he has street tires on it, and he keeps up with sport bike riders in Southern California through the canyons. So obviously this bike is super capable if you're a good rider. Now, could I do that? Absolutely not. But the bike definitely could. So road riding, it's absolutely amazing. I think one final thing, I've talked about in my other videos, if I was going to do a big road ride, I'd ride my Harley Davidson Road Glide CVO all day, every day. Whole bunch of reasons for that. You can watch other videos to find out. But this bike, even with these Heidenau Scout K60 tires, it is super smooth. It's super comfortable. If you got the GSA version, this is a standard GS version with the bigger tank, it would probably give you more wind protection. It'd be even better. So this bike would be really hard to beat. Now this bike here that I borrowed, this is a 2020, so it's a little bit of an older bike. It's got 20,000 miles on it. The windshield is broken, so you can't really adjust it. It always just wants to come up, all the way up, which is a bit of a pain off-road. So I'll leave that out because this bike has definitely been used. But road riding, it's amazing. Now let's move on to the section that if you're new, you probably want to talk the most about is how is this bike for a new rider off-road? The one thing that comes to mind for me, well, let's back up. First, it's all about the tail lever front suspension. I'm not necessarily sold on the 21-inch versus 19-inch wheel debate. Everybody says you have to have 21-inch front wheel on an adventure bike. They're all coming with 21-inch front wheels. Like the KTM Super Adventure R is a 21-inch front wheel. I don't really notice a difference. I'm riding here in St. George, Utah. Shout out to Southbound Adventures for hooking me up with this bike. The riding is very similar to what I'm used to in the western slope of Colorado. very rocky and loose. It doesn't have like the really soft sand sections that we have, the soft clay sections, I should say. Like it's not really that sandy, but out here, so this kind of stuff I'm used to riding on, I don't really notice, like going through the rocky sections or like the baby head sections, I don't really notice a disadvantage with this bike. So back to where I think this bike is, there's two things that really make this bike super beginner friendly off-road. It's the tail lever front suspension and the power delivery of this motor. The front suspension, the hardest thing to get used to, and most people ask me like, you know, now that I've done a BDR, what would you practice most? And again, it would be fast, flowy dirt roads. Because like even the Colorado BDR, 85 to 90% of it is very fast, flowy dirt roads, which is a lot of fun, especially when you're riding with a group. The dust can get brutal, but it is really fun, and you're kind of, you know, in some really cool scenic places. And this bike would be absolutely amazing. The tail lever front suspension gets rid of, for me, that the nervousness in the front wheel that can be very hard for you to, it was hard for me to mentally adapt to. For you, it may go faster, but for me, that was probably the hardest thing to get used to, is just like this kind of feeling. You know, you're cruising and like the bike's just shimmying. And everybody just talks about how you just have to get used to the bike moving underneath you, and that's why a lot of adventure riders stand, because it like gets rid of that feeling. So for me, this bike gets rid of that. Like this suspension, you don't feel that front wheel kicking out. You don't feel it. Like there's some, I think about it is section 2 of the Colorado BDR coming over Overpass. If you're going south to north the traditional way, you climb up through the shale section, and it's like very loose and shaly, and your front wheel is just all over the place. It's like, now he's not totally going to get rid of all of it, but the damping characteristics of how it handles that stuff it's just like unmatched. Like the front handlebars just are so smooth compared to another bike. Like even there's been a couple mental sections here where you're riding and you'll see a rock like, I don't know, about yay big, right? So it's like, I don't know, probably like 6 inches by 6 inches around. You'll see a rock like this, and normally if you hit a rock like that on the road and you're like, you see it at the last second, your wheel kind of kicks and it kicks the rock out, and it's fine, but you kind of have to mentally prepare for that, like the feeling like the bike's gonna, you're gonna lose the bike. When I hit those rocks with this, I just don't feel it. Like you just go over it. And so it's like for that millisecond period, I do this like mental talk with myself, like, oh, here comes this rock, get ready for that feeling. The bike's gonna stay upright, you're gonna be fine. And then you don't feel it and you're like, whoa, that was weird. So out here, I even did some of I intentionally went through some looser stuff, and you just don't really feel it. Like the bike just doesn't feel nervous underneath you. It is just super, super stable. So back to Ophir, we had 2 guys that rode GSs on our ride, and not to say that the bike made all the difference, because they didn't drop their bikes on section 2 of the Colorado BDR because they're way better riders than I am, and I'm a terrible rider, and so I dropped my bike like 4 times. But they just crushed through everything. And actually, like, I honestly think if I was on this bike, Overpass would have been better on this bike than the Tiger 900 Rally Pro, because when we were going down it, it's like imminent death to your left, super loose shale, like shattered tile down the middle, and the front wheels all over the place. It was like the hardest I've ever worked to get a bike downhill ever. It was really, really hard. This bike, I just feel like it would be such a difference maker. And 2, the second part that I think it would make a huge difference is this motor. So most bikes I've ridden, when you're at like 1,000 RPM, if you let the clutch out and you're not actually actively giving the bike gas, the bike will die. With this bike, it's actually kind of weird. Like I'll have the throttle out and I'll be doing like a tight turn or something, and the bike just pulls itself, which is kind of wild. So with the super low speed tractor, like John Deere tractor or like cat tractor or whatever, like that kind of, like that tractor ability of this power plant with this front suspension and the rear suspension, because the rear suspension also, like it just smooths everything out. The bike is not nervous. It is just, I mean, it is something else. So the downside obviously is I haven't ridden a full-size adventure bike off-road in a while. So like I think the biggest downside for anybody that's looking, if you're new and you're going to get buying your first adventure bike, the weight really sucks when you're going slow. So when you get in those areas where you kind of got to like reverse the bike. You know, you got to do your 100-point turn. If you haven't, Chris Birch's Say No to Slow, he shows you how to like turn the bike around in tight situations. It is just a lot more difficult on this bike, and that's where you feel the weight of this bike. Otherwise, this bike doesn't feel very big. And I've heard a lot of more experienced riders say that the bike just doesn't feel very big, especially like once it's moving. For me, the hardest thing has just been in new areas, and it's a new bike, right? I feel like if I had some more time with this other than just a day or an afternoon riding this bike off-road, I'd probably be a lot more comfortable with it and it wouldn't be so bad. So just that tight stuff, is kind of where it shows its weight, and it's a little bit of a downside. So item number 3, if I was going to talk about, you know, if I was looking back at my journey, one of the very first videos I ever put out, honestly, this bike is for me. To be honest with you, I've talked a lot about, you know, one of my very first videos I ever did is like, I'm a brand new motorcycle rider and I bought a KTM 1290 Super Adventure S, full-size liter bike, quote unquote, more than a liter actually, because it's almost 1300 cc's, not 1000, and why I didn't regret that decision. At the time, I didn't buy a GS because everybody had a GS and I wanted to do something different. I also wanted a lower seat height. Now, having ridden this, the seat on this standard bike really isn't that tall. And honestly, I don't know that I would go with the taller suspension. Having now ridden this bike with the standard suspension off-road, I think it's plenty. I don't know that I would need the sport suspension. But honestly, yeah, this bike is pretty much for me. I think because it is a BDR slayer. Like, I get it now. Like, now I understand why this is probably I think this is the most popular selling motorcycle around the world, if you look at the world collectively. Not in the US, because I think in the US the Harley Davidson Street Glide is still #1, but I think the Road Glide is slowly creeping up, if it not passed, because those numbers like flip-flopping in the US. But now I just get it, because on fast, flowy dirt roads, this thing would be amazing, which is like 85 to 90% of the Colorado BDR. On Cumberland Pass, which is like a bunch of baby head section, it's basically like it's like baby heads embedded all the way up the pass. This thing would have been amazing. I got my teeth rattled to death on my Tiger 900, where I found some sections that are very similar out here, and I went through them specifically. This bike was super comfortable. It just ate everything up. Like, it was awesome. Like, Cumberland Pass, this thing would be amazing. It would be Hagerman Pass, probably wouldn't be as fun. I think it would. Actually, it might be. I think Hagerman's totally doable. And then, of course, with like this power plant and the way you can go slow, and you can tractor everything, like section number 2, which is you know, of the Colorado BDR, which is the hardest section, this thing would be amazing. Obviously, there's 2 guys we rode with that are really good at riding bikes, and they crushed every section, no problem. I think, as I mentioned earlier, they weren't dropping their bikes. I was, and they were on these big GSs. So honestly, I think and I also think you can grow into this bike. So if you're looking to get far more technical and do a lot more off-road, if you have the skills, this bike can do a lot. So it is not limited to just like my crappy skills, and it's making up for it, but it also does an amazing job of like making up for all my inabilities and giving me a lot more confidence and making me more comfortable, because the bike's basically telling me like, hey, I can handle this, we're fine, we're good. But if you're really good at riding bikes, like, you can really push these things. There's I think it's Bike World, which is a channel in the UK. This guy, Chris, I mean, he rallies the heck out of one of these things through some single track and stuff. So if you're good, you can really, really push these bikes. So honestly, yeah, looking back on it, if you want to do a lot of road miles, fast, flowy dirt roads, and you want something to help you get comfortable on what I think most BDRs are right now, caveat, I think a lot of BDRs are getting more and more technical, which I think is a bit of a bummer, because I think that's going to kind of push people out of it, as opposed to like having a lot of people just being able to enjoy some really cool backcountry dirt roads on motorcycles. Maybe not, but that's the way I think it's going, which I think is kind of a bummer. I think note on that, like, if you look at the Utah BDR, it seems like everybody does Lockhart Basin through Utah up into Moab, as opposed to the standard route. Like, every video I've looked up on the Utah BDR, it's like everybody's going through Lockhart Basin, which is just like super technical and gnarly, which I would want to ride my Honda 450 on that. Like, I would not want to take a big adventure bike on it. But there's like a whole group of GS riders that did it. It's like, they're good at riding. They rode those bikes through that. It looked like it was a long day for them, but like, the bike can handle it. So if you're looking to crush BDRs, do big miles, you want to grow into your off-roading prowess, like this thing's gonna be amazing. Now I think if you want to do a lot more technical riding, have more of a dirt bike style feel, then you got to go with a lighter bike. I mean, there's no way around it. But yeah, this thing's amazing. So with that, if you've made it this far in this video, which is only a select few of you, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, all that YouTube stuff. And until next time, stay safe out there.